Prior to getting the link clicked on is also making sure you're asking for the right amount. If it's too high, they probably won't click through. If it's too low, they might do, and they may even donate, but you potentially missed out on some much needed finances because you could have asked for more. So the perfect amount is difficult to find. It's going to vary from one donor to another, but we're going to look at some of the tricks on how you can make sure that the amount you are asking for is dynamically tailored to that donor. And then finally, from me, you're going to want to get through to the website and actually click donate. So we've recently released express payment options. Lovely example of this on the right. We're not going to be talking about that too much today. Again, lots of resources on that. But this is yet another way that you can make it quicker and easier for your donors to donate with just 2 button clicks. Brian and Dana will also be sharing some tricks on how to make sure the ask amount is pulled through to the page and how to make sure that the website experience is smooth and maximizing any potential income and ultimately giving a personalized experience. Okay, I'm going to drink some water and pass you over to Dana.
Awesome. Thank you, Ollie. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And pick up where Ollie just left off. So I think a lot of things that Ollie just touched on as far as tactics that should be used by pretty much anyone who's asking donations, as far as personalizing the ask, making sure that people are recognized for the way that they've engaged with the organization historically. All of those things are things that can be made like pretty easily done in NationBuilder emails using the data that's available about your supporters in your database. So that's what we're going to focus on over the next few examples. So as Ollie mentioned, some of this will be reminiscent of the last webinar, but very tailored to fundraising language specifically in ways that this can be employed in those emails. So touching on the if-else statement that Ollie was just speaking to, but just in case anyone wasn't on that call or if anyone needs a refresher, because I think a lot of times with things like this, you might see it and you'll be like, oh, that's really cool. And then you know that the documentation is in your back pocket and then you join this and you're like, I did not review that before I joined this webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and just touch on what that is again. So if-else statements, they're not specific to NationBuilder and they're not specific to even Liquid, the language that we're using here. These are something that show up time and time again in all sorts of different programming languages, but it's essentially a true or false statement if somebody's profile meets certain criteria. So does this person have this tag? If so, show them this content. If someone doesn't have the tag, they see something else. The same can be said for different elements of someone's profile. So if someone's a member, they see this content versus someone who's not. If someone's a donor, they see this content versus somebody who's not. So this is very customizable. Brian actually later in the presentation is going to show you just even one resource that we have of several of different pieces that you can look at on someone's profile and build these like true, false, if else statements. So we can use them in the body of email to display content dynamically, depending on whether or not a statement is true or false. If someone has a tag, if a profile has a certain variable or like a certain field filled out in a certain way. And the reason that this type of conditional logic or this like true false statement is really helpful is that one, you can send many different, like very targeted, very specific emails to a huge swath of people without necessarily having to break it out into like 3 or 5 different email blasts. So it saves you some time during what is one of the busiest times of the year for sending out email. Like at the end of the year, I know it's like you're trying to send out a bunch of donation asks and you're trying to send emails that don't have a donation ask. So it's like they're still engaging with you in some way that's not around money. So you're in a constant battle against like trying to keep the content calendar full and trying to keep people interested and trying to get as much money in the door by the end of the year as you can. So this can make it a lot easier. Like build out a template that you repurpose and just change out the content that's going to each type of group, depending on how they've engaged, depending on the tags or if they're a member or if they're a donor or not. It also prevents you from having to build a bunch of custom lists, or again, like segmenting out people in that way and tying them to email blasts, and then potentially running into like an issue of human error of like sending somebody two versions of the same email, because we are all human. I've done this. Everyone's done this, I think, at some point. So if everyone is on the same email, the worst case scenario is someone has like the wrong tag and they just get a different version of the email, but they don't get like two of the same email twice. I don't know if anyone on here has ever done this with retailers do this sometimes. I've even been like subscribed to other organizations where I get an A/B tested email, but I get both versions of the A/B test, and I can see that like I got both subject lines, but the content of the email is the same. And I'm like, well, that person might not have been paying attention, or I ended up on two lists somehow or whatever. And then finally, if you're sending one email and it's a mix of like your donors who are your most engaged people, and then people who have never donated and are trying to, mixing those people into the same email blast is going to do nothing but increase your deliverability rate, because it's going to have more opens because your donors are getting the same email as your non-donors. So by mixing the audiences together versus segmenting them out, it's probably going to help your deliverability and land you in more inboxes, as Ollie mentioned.